Giant Scottish power, I'll be speaking with the chief executive. And partying like it's 1989, the Nikkei in Tokyo hits an all-time high, finally overtaking the record it hit 34 years ago. Good morning, this is Business Live with me, Ian King. The chief executive of Lloyds Banking Group has told Sky News he has seen a rise in both household and business confidence since the start of the year. Charlie Nunn was speaking as the UK's biggest provider of current accounts, savings accounts and mortgages reported a record pre-tax profit for 2023 of £7.5 billion. That was up 57% on 2022 and reflected a rise in the net interest margin. That's the difference between what it charges borrowers and pays depositors, as well as a big drop in the sum it sets aside to cover loans it does not now expect to be fully repaid. Lloyds also set aside £450 million to cover the cost of regulatory investigations into the historic selling of motor finance.
So we've announced some strong results for 2023, both in terms of the results in 2023, but also the strategy execution, where we have made real progress on showing that we can grow parts of the business and we can transform the bank and start to deliver better products and services for customers. So we're feeling good about strategic progress. Of course, the targets we set are for 2024 and 2026. So we're very focused on continuing to make those changes for the future.
You make reference in the statement to the cost of living. You say that you've helped more than 95,000 customers with debt consolidation this year. Do you still see a significant proportion of household customers in difficulty?
Yeah, so the numbers we talked
Assess progress to date
last year are actually broadly similar. 70 to 80% of people are still concerned about the cost of living. 20% of people in the UK, of households, have had to make some significant changes to adapt to what's going on. But those that can't make ends meet is less than 1%. And actually that's stabilised or got a bit stronger in the last quarter or two. That's really important to focus on those customers, and we're very, very focused on them. And we do still have customers coming off low-priced mortgages this year who we're very focused on supporting as well. The other side of this, though, is the year has started with some confidence. We've seen the best business confidence for the start of a year since 2016. Consumer confidence is quite high, and people are looking at another few quarters of real wage growth and lowering rates and inflation. So there's some underlying strength in the economy that we're looking forward to this year.
As the UK's biggest mortgage lender, how do you assess the health of the housing market?
Actually, the first few weeks of 2024 have been encouraging. As rates have come down and mortgage rates came down over the Christmas period, we've seen strong demand for customers to remortgage and also start to look to buy a home. So very early days at the start of 2024, but it's encouraging to see that confidence around the housing market is a bit stronger.
You saw an £11.3 billion decline in retail customer deposits during the year. It looks as though a lot of that has been recycled into savings accounts.
Yes, that's the story of 2023, and it was something we did very proactively with our customers. We actually saw our overall deposits slightly increase. As you say, people were moving money out of current accounts into other savings products. We actually contacted over 15 million customers last year to show them the different range of savings options they had, as we saw better investment rates for the future around savings products. And we opened 3.9 million savings accounts. And it was great to see, even in the fourth quarter, we saw an increase into our savings products of over £4 billion. So it was a very dynamic market. It was the right thing to do for our customers, and actually Lloyds Banking Group competed very well in that market.
You touched just now on business confidence. Risk-weighted assets in commercial banking were unchanged during the year. Do you see a growing appetite for credit from businesses this year?
It's a really mixed picture. In SMEs, which are really the heart of an economy, it's a mixed picture. Overall, the SME segment has been reducing both its borrowings and its cash flows. And so 2023 was a difficult year. And that was made up of some businesses that were finding it harder to deal with the inflation in their supply chains and lower consumer demand, who actually just had reduced cash flows and couldn't borrow. And actually those that were stronger last year, that had cash flows, were using their money to pay down their debt because of the higher cost of borrowing. So last year was a difficult year. On the larger corporate side and foreign direct investments and institutions, Obviously, again, the cost of borrowing has been a challenge for their investments, but also we've seen stronger demand for financing and investments as we come into 2024. And we think there is strong demand to invest into the UK if we can continue to build certainty and stability around the economy and some of the growth going forward. So that's a slightly different dynamic. It's more around looking for opportunities to invest going forward.
Well, that sounds like good news. You've set aside £450 million to cover the FCA investigation into how motor finance has been sold historically. I know you can't go into details about how much this may ultimately cost you, but are these comments about this being PPI on wheels over-egging the story?
Yeah, so as you say, we've announced a provision today, and at this stage, actually, it remains uncertain as to whether the customer loss and misconduct, if any, is going to come through. So we welcome the FCA's investigation into this. They announced that a few weeks ago because we think that will provide certainty or clarity, at least, for our customers and the industry. And it's really important that we get that from our regulator. One of the important things, Ian, that they announced is customers can wait for that clarity before they need to act. They're going to give time for customers to get the clarity around what they find in this before they move forward. So important we took the provision, and actually we welcome the FCA's intervention to provide that clarity going forward.
Now, the bigger picture on impairments is that I think the situation's been flattered by the repayment of debt by a single name client, you say in the statement. I assume that's the Barclay family in the Telegraph Group.
Yeah, so as you know, it's been well trailed in the press. We had a customer pay back their debt. That's resulted in a circa £700 million write back in our Q4 numbers. And obviously a write back means it's writing back for losses we incurred in previous quarters. So any customer obviously always has the legal right to pay down their debt. So it's good. It's good for us. It's good for our customers, and it enables us to continue to invest in what we're doing for our broader customer base.
Now, looking ahead towards the bottom line, net interest margin has declined every quarter this year, and clearly everyone expects the Bank of England to cut interest rates this year. How much more difficult is that going to make it for you to grow profits this year?
Yeah, so we've given guidance today around this. Actually, in our economic guidance, we've suggested that we think there'll be about 3 rate cuts this year, starting at the end of Q2. That's pretty much in line, actually, with the yield curve, with how markets are looking at this year. But that's the important starting point. And then, as you say, we've also guided that our net interest margin will be greater than 290 basis points in 2024. That comes down from 311 basis points that we saw in 2023. So that kind of guided reduction that we've been saying now for a while, we do expect to come through. Obviously, that's why our investment in our strategic initiatives and the growth that we've committed to is really important. And you'll have seen, Ian, today we recommitted to our guidance for 2024 and 2026 around both our return on tangible equity and our capital generation. And we're still committing to, in 2026, a greater than 15% return on tangible equity and greater than 200 basis points of capital generation. So the strategy is intact, and we're feeling good about our progress on that.
That was Charlie Nunn speaking to me a little earlier. I can tell you Lloyds shares currently up by some 2% right now. Some other business news stories for you now. And annual profits at Rolls-Royce have more than doubled on the back of an increase in defence spending around the world and the continued recovery in air travel. The aircraft engine maker and marine propulsion specialist said underlying operating profits for 2023 came in at £1.6 billion. That was up from £652 million in 2022. Rolls, which said that cost reduction plans that will see it cut up to 2,500 jobs by the end of 2025 were well underway, said its large engine orders were the highest in more than 15 years, with major orders coming from Air India and Turkish Airlines. The shares have risen this morning by 8%. The advertising and marketing giant WPP has suffered a drop in full-year earnings after a slowdown in spending by clients in the technology, healthcare and retail sector, especially in markets such as Germany and China. WPP, which owns the J. Walter Thompson and Ogilvy and Mather agencies, said full-year pre-tax profits fell by 5% to £1.5 billion. But WPP said it was confident of raising operating margins this year, highlighting recent new assignments with clients such as Allianz, Krispy Kreme, Mondelez and Nestlé. The shares are off right now by 1.25%. Shares of Hargreaves Lansdown have fallen by more than 4% this morning after the UK's biggest wealth management platform reported a 38% drop in new net business during the final 6 months of last year. The Bristol-based company was reporting a 5% fall in half-year pre-tax profits, £182.5 million, due to one-off costs related to a recent restructuring. But Dan Olley, the new chief executive, noted that customer numbers had grown by 20,000 during the period, taking it to 1.82 million clients. And the FTSE 100 mining giant Anglo American warned today that it expects industry conditions to remain challenging in the short term as it launched a review of its assets. Anglo was reporting a pre-tax profit of $3.6 billion for 2023. That was down 62% on 2022 and was partly due to a 35% fall in the price of metals such as rhodium and palladium and a 14% drop in the price of coke and coal. It also reflected a $1.6 billion write-down in the value of Anglo's stake in the diamond producer De Beers. I'm very sorry. We're going to cut into the business news momentarily to go to the Commons. There's an urgent question on the chaos last night in the Commons.
Deep fakes and other dangerous material. And also, with the rise in anti-Semitism, Islamophobia and hate, can the leader confirm that the government will actually bring forward a hate crime and extremism strategy with some urgency? And finally, that the Defending Democracy Task Force should now have a broader remit to defending democracy from within our borders, and we should take a more cross-party approach as we head to what is likely to be a very testing general election.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. First of all, can I join with all those who have paid tribute to Alexei Navalny, who, in the wake of an assassination attempt, returned to stand with his fellow countrymen against Putin's tyranny, knowing full well what that might mean for him and his family. He put his country and his countrymen before himself. Can I also remind the House that the government will again outline its position on the very serious matter of Israel and Gaza in a written ministerial statement soon? Can I say to the honourable lady opposite that I would join her firstly in her thanks to our security services, particularly those of the House authorities, in keeping us safe, and point to our record on adapting legislation to cope with the evolving nature of some pretty awful protests that not just MPs but the general public have been putting up with, the work that we have been doing in the House on social media, the new services in the House of Commons Library, and the Defending Democracy Task Force. It would be nice to have the opposition's support in those matters, in particular the legislation that we will bring forward in the future. I want to say that this House will never bow to extremists, threats or intimidation. It has not, it will not, it must not. And I would ask all honourable members not to do this House a further disservice by suggesting that the shameful events that took place yesterday were anything other than party politics on behalf of the Labour. Let me bring the House up to date. Two significant things happened yesterday, and I'm not sure all honourable members have clocked. Firstly, it fell to the government benches to defend the rights of a minority party in this House. If the honourable lady opposite cannot bring herself to reflect on the appalling consequences of her party's actions yesterday, if she cannot rise above the narrow and immediate needs of her weak and fickle leader, to fulfil her duties to this House as its shadow leader, perhaps she might like to reflect on the damage her party has done to the office of the Speaker. I would never have done to him what the Labour Party have done to him. Secondly, we have seen into the heart of Labour's leadership. Nothing is more important than the interests of the Labour Party. The Labour Party before principle. The Labour Party before individual rights. The Labour Party before the reputation and honour of the decent man that sits in Speaker's chair. The Labour Party before fairness, integrity and democracy. In Rochdale, the Labour Party before a zero-tolerance policy towards anti-Semitism. Many of us knew this about the Labour leader. I saw it in his frustration of our country getting the best deal possible when we left the EU. The Labour Party before country. I have to tell the honourable lady opposite, the people of this country don't have a copy of standing orders of this House lying around their house. They haven't been chatting about parliamentary procedure over their cornflakes this morning, but they value fairness. They want the rights of all to be protected. They cannot abide bullies and cheats. They cannot abide people who trash our nation or fail to defend its interests or the institutions that protect them. We often, on this side of this House, rightly criticise the former leader of the Labour Party for the things he stood for and for being wrong on those matters. But I will tell you one thing about the former leader of the Labour Party. At least he thought he was right on those matters. The current leader of the Labour Party is quite happy to do what he knows to be wrong. He puts the interests of the Labour Party before the interests of the British people. It's the Labour leader that doesn't get Britain, and the past week has shown that he is not fit to lead it.
Sir Bernard Jenkins.
Madam Deputy Speaker, can I suggest that the priority of this House should be to command the public confidence of our voters, and that I don't think they, or indeed a majority in this House, feel that we resolved anything on the question of Gaza and Israel yesterday. So can I suggest to my right honourable friend that the government should take up the suggestion of the shadow leader of the House and hold a debate in government time on a government motion so that every motion and every amendment can be considered. And that would draw a line under this matter.
Well, can I thank my right honourable friend for his suggestion? I think it was an additional sad thing that what happened yesterday with regard to the Speaker happened on a day when the SNP were trying to hold an Opposition Day debate on the most serious of issues. I have heard what the honourable gentleman has said, and I will be speaking to business managers.
SNP spokesperson Owen Thompson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Now, obviously, yesterday was incredibly disappointing from our point of view in terms that was meant to be an opposition day. It's one of only 3 times in the calendar year where our party gets an opportunity to put forward our business to the House. And I don't think it was a surprise to anyone what we were coming forward with. We had been allocated an opposition day 4 or 5 weeks ago, and for very understandable reasons that had to be moved when the Northern Ireland Assembly was reconvening, so we totally understood why that had to be moved. And at that stage, there were conversations asking me when we'd see sight of the Gaza motion that we'd be bringing forward. So for anyone to suggest they didn't know that that was the topic that we might be coming forward with is quite extraordinary. Yeah. So when we actually got to that position, and on our opposition day, one of the very few times we do get to have our policy put forward, our voice was silent when our vote was not able to be taken. And that is incredibly disappointing for me and incredibly disappointing for the significant numbers of my constituents, and I know the constituents of my colleagues and other colleagues from across this chamber who wanted to support that motion. So could I ask the Leader of the House, given that effectively we did not get an opposition day yesterday, can we have an allocation of an alternative date for our opposition day, given that didn't happen? We lost, as others have said, a significant amount of time at the start of the debate, and because of the decision of the Speaker, unfortunately, Madam Deputy Speaker, we lost 40 minutes at the end of that debate. And I'm sorry, but that meant that colleagues were cut short and some withdrew. So from that point of view, I would ask the Leader of the House what consideration she could give to that. And beyond that, what consideration can be given to the protection for the smaller parties, not simply being railroaded for political purposes of one of either of the bigger parties. Now, where I do echo the comments of the Shadow Leader of the House, I think it's critical that all members of this place, whatever their position or status, are protected from bullying and intimidation. I think it's entirely unacceptable if reports are to believe that there is reporting across many media outlets that there was significant pressure put on Mr. Speaker to come to his decision yesterday. And can I ask the Leader of the House what steps she is going to take to investigate these very, very serious claims? Because if there is anything of substance to these, that is an affront to any democracy where a party leader can direct decisions of the chair of this place. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, as Chief Whip, I am involved in a number of conversations, as you know, on how business comes forward. And I had direct assurances that I would have a vote on the words of my motion yesterday. Everybody knew the potential outcome at the end of yesterday's debate well in advance. So to suggest that nobody knew that that was going to be the outcome is utter nonsense. The reason that we were in the position we were in was because the normal conventions and standing orders of this House were overruled against the advice of the clerks, and that only happened because the Labour Party wanted to get dug out of a hole, and it's unacceptable.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It is no secret to anyone that regularly tunes into these sessions that I frequently disagree with the Scottish National Party on everything that they raise in this chamber. But they have a right to say these things on the floor of the House and debate their issues. If I was able to speak in the debate yesterday, I would have been critical of how they brought forward the motion and perhaps their motives for doing so. But it is their right to do that. And our standing orders protect the ability, in particular of minority parties, to be able to have those debates. There are serious consequences to the decision that was taken yesterday for minority parties and also for the government. Our motion and amendment was the only one, for example, that mentioned violence against women and girls that took place. So this is very important, and we need to make sure that those rights of minority parties are protected going forward. I am very sympathetic to the SNP being given more time. I also have to say I'm sympathetic about it being knocked off the Labour Party's allocation. And with regard to the serious matter of Mr. Speaker did come to the House yesterday. He did apologise, and I know he is meeting with all parties on this matter, and I will be meeting with him later today.
Andrew Russell.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Leader of the House will be aware that I represent Romford, which is in the London Borough of Havering, and it's a historic Essex market town. But will she please arrange for a debate to take place on the floor of the House about the fairness of local government funding? My borough is nearing bankruptcy because of the failure to have a fair funding system for boroughs like Havering. We're also fleeced by the Mayor of London, who takes huge sums of money from places like Havering to fund the Greater London Authority. So can we please have a debate that will bring about reform to local government in Greater London and give fairer funding for boroughs like Havering, and hopefully a referendum in Havering so that we can go back to being fully part of Essex.
Well, I welcome the honourable gentleman back to his place, and he is quite right to raise pressures on his council, particularly those born from the Mayor of London, whose budget is in crisis. Across the board, local government has had about a 7% uplift, but there are clearly some local issues and particular pressures that London boroughs are facing because of the Mayor's mismanagement. He will know that the next questions to the Secretary of State on this matter are on the 4th of March.
Chair of the Backbench Business Committee, Ian Mearns.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. Madam Deputy Speaker, can I thank the Leader of the House for the business statement and for announcing in particular the backbench business debates for next Thursday. I think the Leader of the House will be aware that now, between now and Easter, that the Backbench Business Committee has little or no time to allocate for debates here in the Chamber beyond next Thursday due to other business encroaching into Thursdays, including the budget debate, for instance. And I'm wondering, therefore, if there is to be any additional time between now and the Easter recess, if the Leader of the House could possibly tip me a wink as soon as possible. And also, if she could tip us a wink via the normal channels regarding the date of the Estimates Day debates, please. We would really appreciate that so we can actually get those wheels into motion. Of course, we will continue to welcome applications for debates in Westminster Hall on Tuesdays and Thursdays. And, Madam Deputy Speaker, we've actually written as a committee to the Procedure Committee to ask them to change standing orders in Westminster Hall so that Westminster Hall debates on Thursdays can begin at 12:30 instead of 1:30. It seems to me it's something which hasn't sort of caught up with the way in which the parliamentary timetable has changed over the years, and it might actually facilitate better attendances at those debates on a Thursday afternoon.
Well, can I thank the honourable gentleman again for his advert for the Backbench Business Committee. He knows that I'm very keen to give him time and early sight of the allocation so that he can slot in those debates, and certainly also to make him aware of when the dates for when those estimate debates will take place. I hope to be able to update him very shortly.
Sir Jake Berry.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Would my right honourable friend agree that it's hard for market towns to thrive without an open bank? And that's why I hope she'll join me in congratulating the people, the businesses in Bacup in Lancashire, as well as Link UK Cash Access and the ATM network, who have worked with me to deliver on my pledge to bring banking back to Bacup. That's why I hope we can find time in this House to have a debate on the new banking hub that is opening in a fantastic historical market town in Lancashire. Yeah.
Well, can I congratulate my right honourable friend and his constituents who have worked to ensure that these services are continuing. It is understandable, as costs are looked to be cut by banks, that they give up bricks and mortar, but that doesn't mean the disappearance of those vital services for our communities. Well done to all, and I'm sure that many honourable members will be asking for some advice in the future.
Sir Ben Batchel.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Devon and Cornwall Police have been in special measures since 2022 after multiple failings, and last week it was revealed that 7 current and former women police officers are suing the force for failing to deal with rapes, beatings and psychological torture by male colleagues over a number of years. I wonder if she could arrange for a Home Office Minister to make a statement reassuring the people of Devon and Cornwall and serving women police officers that these allegations will be thoroughly independently investigated and any wrongdoing punished.
Well, can I thank the honourable gentleman for raising this terrible situation. He will know that the next Home Office questions is on the 26th of February, and I would encourage him to raise it directly with the Home Secretary there. But given the serious nature of this, I will make sure that the Home Secretary has heard what he has said today, and that at the very least his office is updated.
Robert Jenrick.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Would my right honourable friend agree with me that the real issue of the events of the last 24 hours is not the party political shenanigans suggested by the shadow leader of the House. The real issue is that this House appears cowed by threats of violence and intimidation. The Mother of Parliaments appears...
Hello and good afternoon. It is 12 o'clock. We're going to continue our coverage of the fallout of the situation last night in the Commons. 59 MPs and counting have now declared no confidence in the Speaker of the House. Let's go back to the Commons, where the former Immigration Minister, Robert Jenrick, is on his feet.
Extremists to intimidate British members of Parliament. This is wrong. It has to stop. Would my right honourable friend organise a debate on extremism and how we tackle this challenge, which is one of the central issues facing our generation?
Yeah. Well, I could not agree more with my right honourable friend. British Jews are suffering a grotesque level of hatred and abuse, which, quite frankly, shames our country. And he is absolutely right that there cannot be any tolerance or quarter given to those individuals that threaten and try and prevent members of Parliament conducting their business and honouring the obligations they have to their constituents to use their judgment when they come into this place. He will know that there is a tremendous amount of work going on with the House, with government, to ensure that we protect democracy and that we are protecting all communities in Britain. And I will make sure that the Home Secretary has heard his remarks today.
Vicky, sorry. Barry Shearman.
Madam Deputy Speaker, thank you for that. This is quite a ticklish question in the sense that last night, I'm the longest serving member on this side. I've not seen scenes that we saw yesterday, I think only on one other occasion. Indeed, it was shameful, I thought, that the BBC had to blank off the proceedings at one stage from the crude and vile language that was coming from one end of this chamber. So I think, could I ask the Leader of the House, can we seriously review what went wrong yesterday and to get it sorted? Because I have every confidence... Can I allow to say, we should learn from what happened yesterday rather than carry on the awful rowdy behaviour that we saw. But could I just get one little... This is about business questions. Can I have an early debate on those people up and down the country, mainly in the north of England, but also in Wales, that are being fleeced by lawyers and legal companies over cavity wall insulation, where people have got badly cavity wall insulation, and they are then being absolutely ruined and losing their homes because of predatory lawyers.
Yeah. Leader of the House.
Well, with regard to the honourable gentleman's first point, I don't think there is any doubt what took place yesterday, and it was completely shameful. And I don't think there is any doubt about the procedural consequences of it. If members are still in the dark about that, the clerk of the House has provided some very clear advice. And I do want to take the heat out of this. I think that we do need to reflect on what has happened, but I can tell him, as Leader of this House, I will defend the rights of all members to air views and to, in the case of opposition parties, for their voice to be heard in this chamber. And it was to my great sadness that it fell to me yesterday to do that for this place. With regard to his other matter, I shall make sure the Secretary of State has heard what he has said.
Points of order will come after the select committee statement. If the honourable gentleman had wanted to intervene in business questions, I would of course have called him if he'd been here at the beginning. But I'm afraid I do have to direct him to make his point of order at the end of the select committee statement. And whilst I'm about it, it just might be useful for me to remind honourable and right honourable members that any criticism of the Speaker or Deputy Speakers can only be done on a substantive motion. I just want to remind, bearing in mind what the leader said about taking down the temperature, just a reminder that that is the case. Vicky Ford.
Madam Deputy Speaker, in order to be here at this time, I have delayed giving a personal statement to the police on the latest individual who thinks it's fair game to harass, stalk and threaten members of this House. It is clear that the lack of transparency over the reasons why we sometimes vote one way or another mean that these votes are often willfully misinterpreted and used to drum up hatred against parliamentarians, and that this perverts our democracy. I would like to make a suggestion. The European Parliament has many flaws, but in that place it is possible to lay a written explanation of vote on the Parliament's website beside one's voting record. The opposition spokesman, the government spokesman do it on behalf of the party. Any individual member can place their own written explanation of why they have voted the way they have. It stops the votes from being misinterpreted, it keeps members safer, and it stops democracy being perverted.
Oh, that's the Conservative MP, Vicky Ford there. Speaking during business questions, the Leader of the House of Commons, Penny Mordaunt, taking part in this session. Of course, the fallout continues from last night in the chamber, the attempted vote on an SNP motion which descended into chaos, and now the pressure mounting on the Speaker of the House, Sir Lindsay Hoyle. 59 MPs have signed a no confidence motion in the Speaker. Let's bring in our political correspondent, Matthew Thompson, who is in Central Lobby for us. Matthew, it's great to have you with us. So, look, we heard a little bit in business questions there from the Leader of the House, Penny Mordaunt, addressing some of the issues that took place in that chamber 12 hours or so ago now, saying that it really was part of playing politics and laying the blame for some of what happened at the Labour Party's door.
Very much so. I mean, it was a blistering attack on the Labour Party, wasn't it? Saying that they put the Speaker in a completely untenable position, that they were putting the Labour Party before the interests of the country and things of that nature. Now, that view of it is consistent with a view that is widely reported and whispered about here in the corridors of power, largely from, it has to be said, SNP Conservative MPs, that the decision yesterday by Lindsay Hoyle to allow that Labour amendment was essentially some kind of what they would call collusion with his former party. He's a former Labour MP, of course, to spare them the embarrassment of a major rebellion had they had to vote for the original SNP motion. There is, of course, a different interpretation of that, which is the one that Lindsay Hoyle and certain people in the Labour Party are putting forward, which was that actually it was good intentions motivated by a concern for the safety of MPs. That's certainly been Lindsay Hoyle's position. But what I did think was interesting about what Penny Mordaunt said is when she actually addressed the question of the Speaker, which is really the thing that's dominating here in Westminster today and his future, she was perhaps a little bit more sanguine on that. I mean, her actual words were, with regard to the serious matter of the Speaker, so obviously still considering it as a serious matter, he did come to the House yesterday. He did apologise, she said, and then she said she'll be meeting with him later on today. That sounded almost conciliatory. And I think there are two interpretations of what's happening at the moment going around. One is that there are currently 59 people who've signed an early day motion, it's called, essentially a no confidence motion in the Speaker of the House. One of those is populated with SNP MPs. I mean, the majority of the third biggest party in this place doesn't support the Speaker. That's a very serious situation. He's under serious, serious pressure. The other way of looking at it, and I'm not making a distinction as to which one is the more valid way of looking at it, but the other way of looking at it is the government aren't exactly going for him. We've just had a short briefing from the Prime Minister's spokesman with journalists who said that the Prime Minister's focus was on real practical steps that they can take to address the situation in the Middle East. It doesn't sound like a government that is gunning for the Speaker yet. I mean, we spoke to a very senior backbench Tory MP who said that actually they thought that this was all a bit of froth and the Speaker was fine. And actually, if you look at the names on that list of 59 MPs, a lot of them are what you might call the usual suspects, the Tory MPs who are quite rebellious, many of whom actually want Rishi Sunak out, let alone the Speaker of the House of Commons. So, as I say, two different interpretations of the same thing. One set of people says this will all blow over, it'll be fine. The other way of looking at it is that this is a very, very serious moment for the Speaker of the House of Commons, and it's impossible at this point to say which of those two interpretations will win out.
Right, and you're right to view it in that way, Matthew, I am sure. I wonder how much what the Speaker has to say is going to play into this now. From those that I've spoken to, it would seem as if the Speaker will have to say something that reassures the parts of the party, perhaps not the usual suspects, but the parts of the Commons, maybe those on the SNP benches who want to be sure, those from the smaller parties, that this sort of thing can't happen again in the future.
Very much so. I mean, we saw the SNP Westminster leader Stephen Flynn saying that, he wanted the Speaker to essentially to account for all the meetings he had yesterday with the Labour Party. And this again buys into that interpretation from the Speaker's opponents that this was all part of some kind of behind closed doors collusion with Keir Starmer and his Chief of Staff Sue Gray. And they want to see a full and frank account of exactly what meetings he had with the Labour Party. There were also rumours reported yesterday. I haven't independently stood any of those up, but there were rumours, for example, that Labour Party MPs had in some way contacted the Speaker to essentially threaten him that if and when they became the government, he would rely on their votes to maintain his position as Speaker. And that has been widely whispered around the corridors here in Westminster. So there is this impression that the Speaker was colluding. Whether that is true or not, is open to interpretation, but there are lots of people who will need to be satisfied. The Speaker's having meetings, we understand, with the SNP, with the Conservatives, with all the major party leaders today, and he will have to account for himself, whether he does so mostly privately. What he says in private differs from what he says publicly. Who knows? It may or may not be enough to satisfy the various parties concerned, but I think it would take, from what Stephen Flynn has said publicly and from what we're hearing from the SNP more privately, it would take rather a lot to sway them from their view this morning that his position as Speaker is untenable.
Yeah, I think you're right about that, Matthew. We continue to watch the names on that list of people who've signed the early day motion expressing no confidence in the Speaker. The pressure continues. All right, Matthew, for now, in Central Lobby, appreciate that. More from you, of course, throughout the afternoon here on Sky News. Now, in the last hour, as Matthew was referencing, the Leader of the House, Penny Mordaunt, attacked the Labour Party for all that went on last night.
I would ask all honourable members not to do this House a further disservice by suggesting that the shameful events that took place yesterday were anything other than party politics on behalf of the Labour. Let me bring the House up to date. Two significant things happened yesterday, and I'm not sure all honourable members have clocked. Firstly, it fell to the government benches to defend the rights of a minority party in this House. If the honourable lady opposite cannot bring herself to reflect on the appalling consequences of her party's actions yesterday, if she cannot rise above the narrow and immediate needs of her weak and fickle leader, to fulfil her duties to this House as its shadow leader, perhaps she might like to reflect on the damage her party has done to the office of the Speaker. I would never have done to him what the Labour Party have done to him.
That's Penny Mordaunt speaking earlier. Now, the SNP spokesperson, Owen Thompson, said his party is disappointed by yesterday's proceedings and asked what could be done to prevent it from happening again.
Yesterday was incredibly disappointing from our point of view in terms that was meant to be an opposition day. It's one of only 3 times in the calendar year where our party gets an opportunity to put forward our business to the House. And on our opposition day, one of the very few times we do get to have our policy put forward, our voice was silent when our vote was not able to be taken. And that is incredibly disappointing for me and incredibly disappointing for the significant numbers of my constituents, and I know the constituents of my colleagues and other colleagues from across this chamber who wanted to support that motion. And because of the decision of the Speaker, unfortunately, Madam Deputy Speaker, we lost 40 minutes at the end of that debate. And I'm sorry, but that meant that colleagues were cut short and some withdrew. So from that point of view, I would ask the Leader of the House what consideration she could give to that. And beyond that, what consideration can be given to the protection for the smaller parties, not simply being railroaded for political purposes.
Well, I'm joined now by the Technology Minister, Paul Scully. Paul, it's great to have you on the show. Before we come to some of the specifics that were mentioned there by Mr Thompson and by Penny Mordaunt, I mean, you've been in Parliament a spell now. Where does what happened last night rank on the sort of the list of shenanigans and untoward behaviour that you've witnessed in there?
Look, it's totally up there with the Brexit days. I was with a lot of 2019 intake MPs yesterday who haven't seen any of this firsthand, the couple of years that we had prior to their election, when this was not quite a daily occurrence, but maybe a weekly or fortnightly occurrence. Why? Because the then Speaker was making up the rules as he went along. And what we were trying to do yesterday was to restore a sense of the procedure, Erskine May, the Bible of parliamentary procedure, if you like, so that everybody could have their say, including the SNP, whose opposition day it was. So there was a lot of politics going on. Most people are going to be totally confused by it, but most people who are busy cooking eggs do know is that there's horrific scenes coming out of Gaza in Israel, and we were focused on ourselves, but freedom of speech in Parliament does matter.
I mean, there was a pro-Palestinian protest outside as all of that was going on inside the Commons. Now, we heard Penny Mordaunt lay the blame for this squarely at the Labour Party's door, but I wonder how much does the government have a responsibility here for pushing this, what happened last night, into the ditch by withdrawing that amendment at the point where they did?
No, look, I mean, first of all, the SNP clearly knew they were going to be dividing Labour on this issue, so it was partly party political at that point. The Labour Party to then cynically put pressure on the Speaker to change procedures, never been done before. The Clerk of the House said as much in his letter to the Speaker, was then inappropriate. What the government did, the government could not rely on the fact that our amendment would even be taken, which would mean we would have been seen to be being perceived to be voting against the ceasefire twice, with the Labour amendment, then the SNP motion, without being able to explain ourselves in our own vote if it had gone beyond 7. So it's a procedural matter, but it would have had big ramifications for our security and, of course, politically. As it happened, the Deputy Speaker and the Speaker could have sorted all of that out when we pulled out by going back to original procedure, which should have been the case. Then the SNP could have had their say and the Labour amendment would have been voted on.
Paul, before we pick up on those procedural points, because I think that is where the crux of this is, talk to us about the security points. That was the reason given by Sir Lindsay, that he wanted to make sure that all voices were heard in the debate yesterday because of the fear that parliamentarians are under threat.
Yeah, look, I understand a lot of the procedural stuff is arcane and slightly complex and bewildering for people outside this place, but they are there for a reason, to allow respectful freedom of speech within the chamber. But security is important. What we should do in the chamber is have our proceedings in there so that they're not swayed by party political gain for the proceedings, but also for what's happening outside. And what effectively happened, the Labour Party were worried about their division and therefore their security that they were getting, and by allowing that procedure to change and effectively push that security risk onto us if we hadn't ever been able to have our say. So we need to stand together as a chamber and as a parliament to make sure we can speak with as unanimity as we can in difficult circumstances. We've seen what's happened to Mike Freer and his office in Finchley, which was burnt to the ground, or had an arson attack by an extremist there. We've seen 2 of our colleagues die in my 9 years here in Parliament, die on the streets of their constituencies. So there is a real threat here. And people I know yesterday were fearful, they were anxious. I was anxious leaving here. As it happened, there weren't that many protesters around at the end of the day. And that's unusual for me. But there are people that are getting way more threats than I ever have.
Yeah. Paul, what does the Speaker need to do then at this point? We've got 59 signatories to this early day motions expressing no confidence. And I don't think you're not one of them at this point, but what does the Speaker need to do to get back the confidence of the House? Can he?
Let's see. I mean, I don't have that answer. I'm really torn with this. I like the Speaker of the House, Lindsay Hoyle, a lot. I respect him. He's been a good Speaker over his term, and he's always reached out, I think, across the House. I think there was a moment of weakness yesterday, and it's whether he can carry with me and others the fact that can never happen again, that he won't be pushed again. He can remain neutral for the reasons that I've just outlined, because otherwise, if there's a chink of that weakness moving forward, then just a lot of opposition day debates in particular that do get weaponised politically are never going to be the same again, and that's a real risk.
What's going to happen then in terms of those procedures, those parts of what happened last night that are hard for people at home to understand but are hugely important to make sure that every voice is heard? Do new rules have to come in after this, regardless of what happens to the Speaker, Paul?
Yeah, look, there's a procedure committee that looks at all the standing orders and all the way we conduct our business in the House. Whatever happens to the Speaker, they need to look at this again. They need to make sure that we have a book written called Erskine May. It's written by a guy called Erskine May in the 19th century, who used to be the Clerk of the House at the time. That's effectively the Bible. It's the rules of the House. That needs to be absolutely bulletproof. So the Speaker will always be able to interpret and have that final decision, but we needed clarity. So the SNP really thought they were going to get to vote on their motion. That was pulled away from them by the changes in procedure. That should not be allowed to happen.
OK, Paul, we'll leave it there. Thanks very much, Paul. It's good to talk to you, as always. Do appreciate you making the time to speak to us this afternoon on what is quite a fraught day, but slightly calmer than it was at some point yesterday. Thanks, Paul. Now, I do want to just bring you viewers a little bit of breaking news that we've had, and it concerns this situation. You will have heard through our coverage there has been the suggestion that threats were made by the Labour Party and the leader of the Labour Party to make sure that Sir Lindsay Hoyle allowed that Labour amendment. We are, according to the wire service, being told that the leader of the Labour Party has categorically denied threatening Speaker to select Labour's amendment on that ceasefire debate. Sir Keir categorically denying that he threatened Sir Lindsay Hoyle. There has been suggestion that threats were made that should there be a future Labour government, the Labour Party would not be as supportive of the Speaker in a next Parliament. So Keir Starmer categorically denying there's been a threat to Sir Lindsay Hoyle over his position. But of course, threatening his position is different to just putting pressure on, asking him to make sure that Labour amendment is a part of that. There's more detail to find out about exactly what did happen. And of course, we are expecting at some point to hear from Sir Lindsay Hoyle, perhaps, about exactly what took place yesterday afternoon before that debate began. Now, as MPs deal with that process in Parliament, little has changed at the heart of the issue of yesterday's debates, the ongoing violence in the Middle East. Now, in the early hours of the morning, the IDF shot down a missile suspected to have come from Houthis in Yemen. Here's our Middle East correspondent, Alistair Bunkle.
Firstly, a few hours ago, air raid sirens right in the very south in the city of Eilat on the Red Sea. The Israelis shot down a ballistic missile that was heading towards Israel, fired, we think, from Yemen by the Houthis. It didn't come into Israeli airspace. The IDF say that it didn't put any civilians at risk, but it again goes to show that the Houthis are not relenting in their campaign to target Israel and shipping in the Red Sea as long as the war in Gaza continues. And then as well this morning in the West Bank Israeli settlement, or just outside it, of Ma'ale Adumim, a terror attack. A number of gunmen shot people as they were in their cars in stationary traffic near a checkpoint. One person was killed, and I think as many as 8 people were wounded. They're being treated now in hospitals in the Jerusalem region. The gunmen have been killed, 3 of them, 2 of them brothers, and a third was tracked down by the Israeli military. And then the other thing to add, which sort of links back to the events in the House of Commons last night, is progress on a possible new hostage deal. Benny Gantz, one of the senior members of the War Cabinet, hinting that perhaps Hamas have softened their position. Now, we think that's because Hamas were demanding a permanent ceasefire, something that the Israelis did not want to accept, but Hamas might now be ready to accept a temporary ceasefire in order to see the release of hostages, and one assumes also the release of Palestinian prisoners from Israeli jails. And I think what I would say is that the one thing we should look out for is the potential for another meeting in Paris tomorrow, or perhaps over the weekend, between the Egyptians, the Qataris, the director of the CIA, and potentially the head of the Mossad. And if Israel do send him, David Barnea, then I think that is a good indication that Netanyahu feels that there's been sufficient progression for his attendance to be worthwhile.
That's Alistair Bunkle reporting there from Jerusalem. Now, here, reports of Islamophobia have hit a record high since the 7th of October Hamas attacks on Israel. Tell Mama, a charity which monitors anti-Muslim hate crime, recorded over 2,000 cases in the past 4 months. That's an increase of 335% compared to the same period a year earlier. And it seems women are more often than not the target of that abuse. They're involved in 65% of the cases recorded. Right, you're watching Sky News Today. Still to come. Menopause matters. Bosses are told to adjust the workplace for women or risk being sued. In mornings, a government scheme intended to make childcare more affordable could actually result in nurseries closing down.
And I'm Sky's US correspondent based here in Los Angeles.
It's turning everybody into, a crazy, violent drug addict.
How are you feeling?
I am angry.
Are you a hypocrite, sir? Will your candidates win?
I hope so.
I gotta be realistic. My sister's dead.
More than 4 weeks on, there's no murder weapon and no suspect. Mum, how are you feeling today?
Jeffrey said, you answer to Ghislaine, you just don't cross her.
I'm so excited.
Severe nightmares of these people coming in and just taking me in the middle of the night.
I've watched as whole towns were torn apart by natural disaster.
I'm alive and I'm thankful for that.
We take you to the heart of the stories which shape our world.
lot of cases that I know are reported from Ukrainian missiles themselves.
Ambassador, with respect, I think that's preposterous.
Welcome back. Now, employers could be sued if they fail to make reasonable adjustments for women who are going through the menopause. Let's bring in our correspondent, Shaman Freeman-Powell, for more on this. Shaman, good afternoon to you. So tell us more about these potential new rules.
Well, the Equalities Watchdog has set out this guidance, giving employers a better understanding of the rights that women experiencing the menopause can expect to receive. It comes after 1 in 10 women who have experienced the menopause said that they've had to leave their workplace due to symptoms such as hot flushes or lack of sleep or brain fog, symptoms which, if continued and substantial, can have a huge impact on women in the workplace. Because of this, the Equality Watchdog has issued this guidance, as well as given employers some useful tips on how they can make the workplace more supportive for women experiencing the menopause. Earlier, Sky News spoke to the Health Minister, Maria Caulfield, who gave us more detail on this.
We're losing so many women who are the most experienced women in the workforce because of symptoms in the menopause. And there are some really simple things that employers can do to make the workplace better, from better ventilation through to the uniform that women have to wear. That just the material alone can make the difference about how women cope with some of those symptoms. And most employers I speak to are really, really keen to keep their experienced women in the workplace.
Maria Caulfield there, the Health Minister, speaking about some of the guidance that the Watchdog has issued for employers. But the Watchdog also gave more detail about those legal rights too, which I can share with you now. It says that menopausal symptoms could now be classed as a disability under the Equality Act's discriminatory action against someone who's absent due to symptoms of the menopause could also be considered unlawful, and derogatory comments could now be deemed as harassment under this new guidance from the Equality Watchdog. It's all about making women that are experiencing the menopause feel like they're supported more at work, because despite the fact that 1 in 10 women have said that they've had to leave the workforce due to experiencing severe menopausal symptoms, very few of those women said that they felt comfortable enough asking for employers to make these reasonable adjustments. So the Equality Watchdog is hoping that this will now go a long way, helping women feel more supported.
OK, Shaman, thank you for that. Let's go back to the House of Commons. Sir Lindsay Hoyle is back in the Speaker's chair. Let's listen in again to this ongoing discussion. It's business questions, but of course it's all about what happened last night.
Unprepared to do the work that a council leader should do, regardless of persuasion. Can we please have a debate in government time about council's responsibility for dealing with situations that have gone wrong and not trying to sue members of their former colleagues who are trying to do their job?
Leader. Well, the honourable gentleman is very diligent in pursuing these matters at all opportunities, including business questions. I would suggest to him that this is perhaps best raised with the Secretary of State on the 4th of March in questions.
Jim McMahon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There's a lot been said about the events of yesterday, but let's not forget that the outcome was that this Parliament has made a very clear mandate in terms of our position on a ceasefire in Gaza. And that's very important. Now let me move on to a constituency matter for the Leader of the House, if I may. People in Oldham work very hard for the house, for their family to live in, and they expect security for that. But some are having the roof literally taken from over their heads, including Mr. Potter through an agreement with a shade greener, a solar installation company. Thousands of people are affected by companies who weren't clear about the terms and conditions and are now taking out loans on the properties, making remortgaging almost impossible. Can we have a debate in government time on the impact of mis-selling in the solar industry?
Well, I will certainly, with regard to his latter point, make sure that the Secretary of State has heard what he has said, and he can put that to ministers directly on the 27th of February. With regard to his former point, it is in the interests of the British people that democracy is protected. As I said, the interests of the Labour Party are trumping democracy.
Shelly Ann Hart.
Speaker, yesterday we saw the politicisation of the situation in Gaza by the SNP to engineer an issue within the Labour Party. Their opposition day, their right. The Labour Party members opposite were reportedly concerned about their security, as we are. But, Mr Speaker, the Labour Party frequently confects issues towards this side. We've seen members on this side called scum by a member opposite, inside and outside this chamber. We've been accused of starving children and of dumping sewage in our seas. And these are false assertions to generate intolerable hatred, death threats and abuse against Conservative MPs. Can my right honourable friend tell me whether the Conservatives have ever asked for special treatment or convention to be overturned to protect us? And does this illustrate that both sides of the House, not just this side, need to take a responsible approach to debate in this House and public discourse and in public life?
Leader.
Well, the honourable lady has made her point extremely well. On those debates, whether they were on storm overflows or free school meals, when members on this side of the House faced very unfair slurs and intimidation, what we did not do was ask that the procedures of this House are upended and put pressure on a decent man in the Speaker's chair to change those processes. That is because it is at the heart of our party that we put the interests of this country first. And one of those interests is that democracy in this place is protected.
Stephen Flynn, Leader of the SNP.
Mr Speaker, last evening we saw the best of this House and its ability to debate, and we also saw the worst of this House as it descended into farce. And I think I speak for everyone in the chamber just now, and indeed yesterday, when I expressed my deep sorrow that that was able to happen, given the content of what it was we were debating. Nevertheless, Mr Speaker, it descended into farce because of a decision that you made, and you alone made, to ignore the advice that was given to you by the clerks. In doing so, on the opposition day of the Scottish National Party, my colleagues and I were denied the ability to vote on a matter which is of grave concern to us and which over recent months we have sought to raise in this chamber at every available opportunity. It ultimately turned into a Labour opposition day. That, quite frankly, is not acceptable. And as I have expressed to you privately prior to proceedings here today, we do not, on these benches, therefore believe that you can continue in your role as Speaker. We do not have confidence in your ability to do so. So I would therefore welcome clarity, either from yourself or indeed from the Leader of the House, as to how we can best facilitate a vote in this chamber at the earliest possible occasion to that effect. Thank you.
Leader.
Can I thank the honourable gentleman for his question? I hope that he can see in my actions yesterday that I am a servant of this House, and that even though it may not be in the government's interests to do so, narrow interest to do so, I will protect the rights of all minority parties to be able to air their views in this place, and to those parties that are afforded opposition day debates, that they are able to have those debates in the fullest sense and have votes on the motions that they put. We create the rules of this House, and the Speaker serves at our behest. I think given the range of views that have been expressed on the floor of the House today, many interventions being supportive of the Speaker and pointing out the pressures that were put on him yesterday, that we take time to reflect. Mr. Speaker has said his door is open to all parties and individual members, as is mine. But as I said, the government will listen to this House. I am a servant of this House, and I will do its bidding.
I will also come in at this point. I will reiterate, I made a judgment call that didn't end up in the position where I expected it to. I regret it. I apologise to the SNP. Just bear with me for a moment. I apologise, and I apologise to the House. I made a mistake. We do make mistakes. I own up to mine. I would say that we can have an SO24 to get an immediate debate, because the debate is so important to this House. I will defend every member in this House. Every member matters to me in this House. And it has been said, both sides, I never, ever want to go through a situation where I pick up a phone to find a friend of whatever side has been murdered by terrorists. I also don't want another attack on this House. I was in the chair on that day. I have seen, I have witnessed. I won't share the details, but the details of the things that have been brought to me are absolutely frightening on all members of this House, on all sides. I have a duty of care, and I say that. And if my mistake is looking after members, I am guilty. I am guilty because
Have some grace. Have some grace. The foots.
I have a duty of care that I will carry out to protect people. It is the protection that led me to make a wrong decision. But what I do not apologise is the risk that's being put on all members at the moment. I had serious meetings yesterday with the police on the issues and threats to politicians, threats heading to an election. And I do not want anything to happen again. So yes, I will apologise. I always will when I make a mistake. I did. I offer an SO24. That is within my gift and power. But I will also say I will do whatever it is to protect anybody in this chamber or anybody who works in this House. That is my duty of care. Andrew Percy.
Mr. Speaker, I was in Israel last week meeting with friends and survivors and hostage families, and I actually felt safer in Israel than I do in this country at this moment in time. And I have two reflections on that visit and on what happened yesterday. First of all, nobody in this House has any business, agency at all in telling the State of Israel where it is able to operate to seek to rescue hostages who are being raped by Islamic terrorists who hold them. Nobody has any business. Secondly, if we have a rerun of the debate we had yesterday, we will have exactly the same thing happen again, which is that members will not vote with their hearts because they are frightened and they are scared. And what do we expect? For months I've been standing up here talking about the people on our streets, demanding death to Jews, demanding jihad, demanding intifadas, as the police stand by and allow that to happen. Last night, a genocidal call for from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, was projected onto this building. That message says no Jew is welcome in the state of Israel or in that land. This is going to continue happening because we're not dealing with it. So if we have a rerun of this, can the leader explain to me what will be any different and how will members vote with their hearts and their consciences? Because too many will not at the moment because of the threats we're receiving, threats that are telling us to leave this country in some of our cases and telling us that they want us or our families to be subjected to pain and to death.
Leader.
Well, can I thank my honourable friend for raising this? I don't think there is any member of this House that has not come under threats and intimidation and increasingly death threats to them, but also members of their family as well. I know I have had many such threats, and other members have spoken about their experiences on the floor of this House. There are many things that we can do with regard to physical security, and I again thank the House authorities for what they did yesterday. And on the particular matter he raises with regard to the projections put on this building last night, that is being looked at by both the Speaker's Office, Parliamentary Security, the Metropolitan Police and Westminster City Council, who will be responsible for pursuing prosecutions in that case. But I would say again to all members of this House, we are elected here to carry out our duty and to take our responsibilities seriously. It is often a frightening task, but we cannot let this place be and ourselves change what we think is the right course of action due to those threats. If we do that, they will have won. And they will never win. We have to show courage, and our constituents need us to show courage on these matters. We must vote and do what we think is right.
Andrew Bridgen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Despite there being a huge and growing public interest and concern over the issue of excess deaths, there remains on the front benches across this chamber a reluctance to engage with this issue, or in some cases even acknowledge it. So how convenient that this week the Office of National Statistics announced that they've suddenly found a large increase.
All right, we'll be listening to some of the debate and business questions in the Commons after the situation that happened last night. 59 MPs have signed a motion of no confidence in the Speaker. The Speaker once again in the chamber and once again apologising for what happened last night and suggesting that he will offer an emergency debate on procedures. The leader of the SNP in Westminster, Stephen Flynn, asking the leader of the House of Commons, Penny Mordaunt, how a debate can be held, how a vote can be held in the position of the Speaker. Now, since the events of last night, there have been rumours that the Labour Party and Sir Keir Starmer in particular put pressure on Sir Lindsay Hoyle to allow that Labour amendment to the SNP motion calling for a ceasefire. The Labour leader has categorically denied threatening the Speaker, and in the last few minutes he has been speaking to the news media. Let's take a listen to what he had to say.
It's very important to put the debate last night into its context. Last weekend I was at the Munich Security Conference talking to world leaders about the plan, hopefully, to bring an end to the awful situation in Gaza, where far, far too many people have died. I drafted a Labour amendment which not only dealt with how we stop the fighting now and get aid in, but also about what the long-term plan is to make sure that we get to a peaceful outcome. I wanted that amendment put before Parliament because I wanted to ensure it was a good debate, that we had the widest possible options. And of course there were discussions with the Speaker, but many, all party leaders speak to the Speaker. But there was absolutely no threat to the Speaker in the course of that. What he wanted to do was to ensure that Parliament had the broadest possible debate on an issue which is really very, very important.
Can you categorically say, then, that no Labour MP warned Lindsay Hoyle that he could lose Labour's support to continue as Speaker after the election if he didn't select that amendment?
I was very concerned that the debate yesterday should be elevated. It's a very important issue. That is probably the most important issue globally at the moment, the conflict in Gaza, and how we bring an end to the terrible situation.
But the specific question is
so I wanted that amendment heard. Of course I had conversations with the Speaker. All political leaders had conversations with the Speaker. What pressure did you put on the Speaker? I simply urged the Speaker to ensure that the debate could be as broad as possible and that MPs could vote for the proposition that they believed in. We're talking here about whether there was one amendment or two amendments on the before Parliament. The real issue is to have that proper debate. And that didn't happen because the SNP walked off because all they were interested in doing was dividing the Labour Party. And once they saw they couldn't do that, they walked off. And the government then walked off. The government of the country walked out of a debate on Gaza because they thought they were going to lose a vote. I think that we should have continued with that debate, had it at the right level, and for Parliament to be able to speak on one of the most important issues of the day.
Can you say that you and your Labour MPs categorically didn't put that pressure on the Speaker, didn't threaten to withdraw your support for him after the election? Can you just say that, yes or no?
I can categorically tell you that I did not threaten the Speaker in any way whatsoever. I simply urged him to ensure that we had the broadest possible debate.
And your MPs?
Broadest possible debate, so that actually the most important thing, which is what do we do about the awful situation in Gaza, could be properly discussed by MPs with a number of options in front of them. That's the right thing to do. The Speaker did the right thing in making sure the debate was broad. But the tragedy is the SNP walked off the pitch because they wanted to divide the Labour Party and they couldn't, and the government walked off the pitch because it thought it was going to lose a vote. So we had one party that was simply seeking to divide on an important issue. The government has lost control of its own MPs and couldn't control the vote. We should have had a proper debate and a proper resolution with all three propositions being put to a vote.
Isn't what really happened is you were under massive pressure within your party to shift your position on a Gaza ceasefire, and if you hadn't secured that vote on that amendment, you'd have faced the biggest rebellion of your leadership.
The proposition I put on the table in that amendment was crafted by me after I came back from the Munich Security Conference, having spoken to Secretary of State Blinken, having spoken to the Prime Minister of Qatar, having spoken to the President of Israel, i.e. having spoken to the people who are actually involved in trying to wait for this awful conflict. I wanted that proposition heard and voted on, and my MPs wanted to vote on it. Happily, it was carried last night, and that's the right thing, but my focus is on what we need to do to resolve the awful situation going on in Gaza.
Okay, so Keir
Starmer. So Keir Starmer explaining what he did and apparently didn't say to the Speaker of the House of Commons, Sir Lindsay Hoyle, saying he just wanted a debate as broad as possible. We'll interrogate some of what Sir Keir Starmer had to say as soon as we get the chance to. And we have our political editor, Beth Rigby, who can do that for us. Elliot Wilson, I apologise, but we'll come back to you later on this afternoon if we can. Our political editor, Beth Rigby, has been listening to what was being said by Sir Keir. And Beth, it's great to have you with us. Look, he said there, he simply urged debate to be as broad as possible. Very similar words to what Sir Lindsay Hoyle said yesterday, but it doesn't really get them out of the hole that they still broke the precedent.
OK, yes, Kamali, but I have to say I've got some breaking news here because I have Stephen Flynn, the SNP Westminster leader, with me. Stephen, you've been asking for a meeting with the Speaker. You said it was a stitch-up last night. You seem to be on the verge of calling him for Lindsay Hoyle to quit. Have you seen him and what happened?
Yes, so I sought out the Speaker this morning and I had a meeting with him just a wee while ago, and I've just followed that up with a statement in the chamber there where I've said that Lindsay Hoyle no longer retains the confidence of SNP MPs to continue in his role. I have grave concerns about the decision that was taken yesterday to turn an SNP opposition day into a Labour opposition day. And from my perspective, I have massive, even bigger concerns about the fact that Sir Keir Starmer met with Lindsay Hoyle prior and privately to that decision being made.
What did Sir Lindsay Hoyle say to you? You'd said that you wanted a full disclosure about those meetings. He didn't reassure you. What did he say to you?
I think it would be unfair for me to talk about a private conversation that I've had with Lindsay Hoyle himself. But all I can say, and I think this is an important point, is that my concerns about the stitch-up yesterday remain. The reality is that Lindsay Hoyle met with Sir Keir Starmer and the Labour Chief Whip prior to making a decision which was politically partisan yesterday.
To be very clear, the third largest party in Westminster, the SNP, are now formally calling for Sir Lindsay Hoyle to step down as the Speaker. You think his position is untenable?
I absolutely do think that Lindsay Hoyle's position is untenable, and I wish we weren't in this position. I have a lot of respect for Lindsay, but ultimately he made a decision yesterday which was politically partisan, and he cannot continue in his role as a neutral chair of the House of Commons. Ultimately, his decision benefited Sir Keir Starmer, and there's huge questions to be asked about what was said between Sir Keir Starmer and Lindsay Hoyle that made him change his mind.
Did the Speaker not make the point to you that he made in the chamber that he did this in good faith? I presume he apologised to you. He was trying to allow all three parties to vote on amendments in what is a very divisive issue. Can you not give him the benefit of the doubt?
So I'm still deeply frustrated about the fact that yesterday descended into farce, because we have been speaking for months about the need for a ceasefire in Gaza. We finally got to a position where the Labour Party were in agreement with us. Yes, Sir Lindsay Hoyle.
You got what you wanted. I mean, the chamber voted for an immediate ceasefire, which is exactly what the SNP wanted. So what's the problem?
Because of the fact that, yes, the Labour amendment went through, and I was supportive of that, a Labour amendment, but our motion, which referred, and this is an important point, to the collective punishment of the Palestinian people, denying them food, water, electricity, medicine, shooting them, bombing them. Collective punishment was not able to be voted upon. And that was a political decision that was taken, and I believe it was taken by the Speaker of the House of Commons following a discussion with Sir Keir Starmer.
Was it not taken by the Conservative Party for pulling the votes? Was it not taken by the Conservative Party? You could have had all the three votes, but the Conservative Party decided not to participate.
The only reason we were in this mess was because Sir Keir Starmer met with Lindsay Hoyle yesterday. Lindsay Hoyle chose to ignore the rules of Parliament, and as such, the SNP on our own opposition day were denied the ability to vote on whether there's collective punishment of the Palestinians.
Stephen Fly, I understand how strongly you feel about it. Let's go back to the Speaker. You are now formally withdrawing support. Can he stay on, or do you think he has to go?
Given that we're the third party in Westminster, we do no longer retain confidence in Lindsay to make decisions which are not political in their nature. I don't believe he can continue in his role.
And just finally, what do you say to people that say, as I asked you last night, that you are playing politics, that you have tabled this amendment to try and put Labour on the wrong side of this argument over the ceasefire, so you can go back to Scotland and tell Scottish voters Labour oppose a ceasefire? That's what you wanted in this opposition day motion, and you didn't get it, and you've thrown your toys out of the pram. What do you say to people that might put that to you?
I have been consistent in my view in relation to the collective punishment of the Palestinian people for months. In November, I forced a vote in the House of Commons on this very matter. The First Minister of Scotland, my party leader's family, were trapped in Gaza and experienced this firsthand. I'm actually quite frustrated when people say that I'm playing politics. In actual fact, what we achieved yesterday was we got the Labour Party to shift its position, and I was delighted at that, and I've been celebrating that.
So
the fact that they,
in the big picture, there was progress here.
In the big picture, there was absolutely progress. We had more people agreeing we need to have an immediate ceasefire.
I'm going to get knocked off air in a moment. Just final question. If the majority of MPs do still back Lindsay Hoyle and the Conservatives and Labour don't fall in behind you, he stays, right?
Yeah, it's up to Parliament to decide. But I think it's important that Parliament has its say. It's going to be for the government to determine whether that happens, but my views are clear.
OK, Stephen Flynn, thank you so much for talking to us on Sky News. So there you have it. Formally, the SNP have withdrawn support from the Speaker of the House of Commons. Now we're waiting to see what happens with the Conservative and the Labour Party, who I think are still supportive. Stay with us. We'll have more after the break.
Good afternoon. It is 1 o'clock. This is Sky News Today, your headlines. The Speaker fights back. Sir Lindsay Hoyle defends the decision that brought chaos to the Commons last night, saying he was putting the safety of MPs first.
I have a duty of care, and I say that. And if my mistake is looking after members, I am guilty.
The leader of the Labour Party categorically denies threatening Sir Lindsay ahead of that debate yesterday. 59 MPs have signed a no-confidence motion in the Speaker.
I can categorically tell you that I did not threaten the Speaker in any way whatsoever.
The Commons have been alight with debate this afternoon. The SNP have said they have lost confidence in the Speaker and want to put it to a vote. Also, this lunchtime. The violence in the Middle East is at the heart of the row in Parliament. One person has been killed in a shooting at an Israeli checkpoint in the West Bank. The UK announces 50 new sanctions against Russia ahead of the second anniversary of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And menopause matters. Bosses are told to adjust the workplace for women or risk being sued. And thank you for being with us. Now, in just the past hour, the Speaker of the House of Commons, Sir Lindsay Hoyle, has launched an impassioned defence of the decisions that he made yesterday. 59 MPs have signed a motion of no confidence in the Speaker, but he has insisted his controversial decision to select a Labour amendment to the SNP motion calling for a ceasefire on Gaza was made out of a concern for the safety of members of Parliament, some of whom have seen protests outside their homes and constituency offices. Meanwhile, the leader of the Labour Party, Sir Keir Starmer, has categorically denied threatening the Speaker into making sure that his party's amendment was heard. We'll have more on that in a moment, but first, let's hear what the Speaker had to say just a short while ago.
I made a judgment call that didn't end up in the position where I expected it to. I regret it. I apologise to the SNP. Just bear with me for a moment. I apologise, and I apologise to the House. I made a mistake. We do make mistakes. I own up to mine. I would say that we can have an SO24 to get an immediate debate, because the debate is so important to this House. I will defend every member in this House. Every member matters to me in this House. And it has been said, both sides, I never, ever want to go through a situation where I pick up a phone to find a friend of whatever side has been murdered by terrorists. I also don't want another attack on this House. I was in the chair on that day. I have seen, I have witnessed. I won't share the details, but the details of the things that have been brought to me are absolutely frightening on all members of this House, on all sides. I have a duty of care, and I say that. And if my mistake is looking after members, I am guilty. I am guilty because
Have some grace. Have some grace.
I have a duty of care that I will carry out to protect people. It is the protection that led me to make a wrong decision. But what I do not apologise is the risk that's being put on all members at the moment. I had serious meetings yesterday with the police on the issues and threats to politicians, threats heading to an election. And I do not want anything to happen again. So yes, I will apologise. I always will when I make a mistake. I did. I offer an SO24. That is within my gift and power. But I will also say I will do whatever it is to protect anybody in this chamber or anybody who works in this House. That is my duty of care.
Well, that was Sir Lindsay Hoyle speaking within the last hour. Let's take a look back now at exactly how events unfolded over the past, 12 hours or so. Now, yesterday, Sir Lindsay took the unusual decision to select amendment by both the Labour Party and the government to the SNP's motion calling for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza. Conservative and SNP MPs walked out of the Commons in protest against his decision later on in the evening, with the Conservatives accusing him of breaking convention to prevent a rebellion within the Labour Party. Some of the Labour Party MPs may well have ended up supporting the SNP motion. After ongoing chaos in the chamber, the Speaker returned to apologise for how things ended up, saying he took responsibility for his actions. And now, 59 MPs have signed a motion of no confidence, and pressure continues to build on him over his future. The SNP have also said they want to hold a vote on the Speaker's position. Well, the leader of the Labour Party, Sir Keir Starmer, has this afternoon had to deny reports that he threatened the Speaker ahead of yesterday's debate.
I can categorically tell you that I did not threaten the Speaker in any way whatsoever. I simply urged him to ensure that we had the broadest possible debate. The most important thing, which is what do we do about the awful situation in Gaza, could be properly discussed by MPs with a number of options in front of them. That's the right thing to do. The Speaker did the right thing in making sure the debate was broad. But the tragedy is the SNP walked off the pitch because they wanted to divide the Labour Party and they couldn't, and the government walked off the pitch because it thought it was going to lose a vote.
Sir Keir Starmer speaking in the last hour, and this morning the government responded to all that took place last night.
I would ask all honourable members not to do this House a further disservice by suggesting that the shameful events that took place yesterday were anything other than party politics on behalf of the Labour. Let me bring the House up to date. Two significant things happened yesterday, and I'm not sure all honourable members have clocked. Firstly, it fell to the government benches to defend the rights of a minority party in this House. If the honourable lady opposite cannot bring herself to reflect on the appalling consequences of her party's actions yesterday, if she cannot rise above the narrow and immediate needs of her weak and fickle leader, to fulfil her duties to this House as its shadow leader, perhaps she might like to reflect on the damage her party has done to the office of the Speaker. I would never have done to him what the Labour Party have done to him.
Let's go to Central Lobby and bring in our political correspondent Matthew Thompson for more on this. Matthew, since we last spoke, plenty has happened. Let's start, if we can, with what we heard from the leader of the SNP in Westminster, Stephen Flynn, calling and asking how they go about getting a vote as soon as possible in the position of the Speaker.
I think that is certainly worth dwelling on, and let's put it in these terms, Mally. The third largest party in the House of Commons has just said very, very plainly that it does not have confidence in the Speaker of the House of Commons. That is a very difficult position for Lindsay Hoyle to be in. The job of Speaker requires, it's an essential requirement for the role, that you command the confidence of the House, that you're seen to be beyond reproach, that you're seen to be completely impartial. And if a party with the heft of the SNP is ranked against you, well, then that is clearly a problem. And it's not just the SNP, of course. We have, as you mentioned, 59 signatures to that early day motion of no confidence in the Speaker. Now, that in itself isn't particularly significant. Without getting into the weeds of parliamentary procedure, early day motions aren't really of any significance. They're more sort of barometers of opinion, if you like. But 59 MPs is quite a lot of MPs, and the question is, does that number keep going up? And the higher it goes, the more and more pressure is on Lindsay Hoyle today. But then there is also a current of opinion. shared by a number of senior MPs in this place that I've spoken to today, also senior Conservative MPs who actually think, broadly speaking, the Speaker may survive. And I think what was notable about what Penny Mordaunt said in the House of Commons just a few moments ago is that the Speaker had come and apologised, and it almost seemed as though it was the government being slightly conciliatory. I think it wouldn't have taken much, let's frame it this way, for the government, given the delicate position the Speaker is in, to give him a nudge if they really wanted him removed. And it doesn't seem like that is the direction of travel, and that is the kind of thing that may just save Lindsay Hoyle's job. Right, so let's pick up then on what we heard from Sir Keir Starmer as well, if we can, Matthew. My apologies, we've moved away from Matthew. We'll come back to Matthew Thompson later on. Let's move on to speak to Elliot Wilson, who I know has been waiting very patiently to join us. Elliot, I apologise for cutting you off at the end of last hour. You saw what happened, but thank you for your patience and for sticking around. Now, Elliot Wilson, you're a former clerk in the House of Commons, so you have great knowledge of the situation that happened last night and the precedent that was broken. What did you make of that decision by Sir Lindsay Hoyle to allow that amendment from the Labour Party on the Opposition Day debate?
Well, the difficult thing about the decision was allowing more than one amendment to be decided upon potentially. And the Speaker says, and I've no reason to disbelieve him, that he did that to give as much possibility of debate as there could be, and also to try to lower the temperature, because undoubtedly things are running at a very high rate of emotion, and he wanted to lower that. He accepts that didn't work, and I think one can accept that that was a well-intentioned thing to do. I think it's extraordinary that we have a situation where the Labour Party is trying to claim some kind of moral high ground. I think most people in this have tried to act with the best of intentions and to do the right thing. I think the bigger story, to be honest, and I think this is what will come out of it, is the level of fury and vitriol and unwillingness to listen to other points of view that is coming out of not only our political culture as a whole, but of the debate about what's happening in Gaza. And I think that is what's going to be utterly poisonous and what really needs to be addressed in the long run.
Yeah, and I'm sure, Elliot, that you will have been watching some of the debate yesterday, and there were times when it felt very consensual, as if there was lots of agreement on the sort of the substance of the matter, getting to a ceasefire eventually, but just how the form of language that was going to be used to get there. And now we're into the politicking, as you say. The advice was given, though, wasn't it, to Sir Lindsay, by the clerk, to not do this. Of course, the Speaker gets to make his own decision, but were you surprised that he ignored that advice?
I wouldn't say I was surprised. I mean, I think the difficulty is that the procedures aren't really set up to deal with the situation we had. And so it was a matter of adapting what we know from the standing orders and what has happened in the few precedents we have to make that decision. Now, I'm not going to gainsay the Clerk of the House, whom I've known for 20-odd years. He's, the unimpeachable procedural authority in these things. Usually the Speaker will take the advice of his clerks, but of course, the existence of a Speaker means that you can decide not to do so. And I think it's good that we now have procedures post-Speaker Bercow for the Speaker to explain why that has happened and for the clerk's advice to be published. I think the Speaker was clearly attempting to square a very difficult circle. But I think what's important is that we're talking about the difference between the Labour Party's amendment being debated and voted on and not being voted on. That's what's made the difference. Now, Labour Party MPs may have felt uncomfortable not being able to vote on that and being forced to vote on something else. That's not for me to say. The Labour Party may have made those representations to the Speaker. I don't know. Sir Keir says that he did not himself make any threats, though I thought it was interesting he didn't say the same of any of his MPs. But, I think the Speaker was in a difficult position, one where if he had taken the clerk's advice, then there would have been no division on the Labour Party's amendment. I understand why the SNP are upset, though I think they're making very heavy weather of it and starting to sound a little bit like their noses are out of joint, and I think that's a danger for them. But I think what the Leader of the House said earlier was quite important, that we really need to take a step back and to look at what's happened here, to look at the way this debate has panned out, to remember, as Mark Francois said, that Sir David Amess was murdered by an Islamic terrorist because of the way he'd voted in the House of Commons. The danger is there, clearly. And I think we all need, from all parts of the political spectrum, to think very carefully about the level of emotion which is infusing this debate and how we maintain it within some kind of proper boundaries.
Yeah, and that you will have heard Sir Lindsay just in the last hour or so. That was his main concern, wasn't it? The safety of parliamentarians, and he said, he's apologised for the way it played out, but that was what he intended to happen. Let's look forward, if we can, then, Elliot. You mentioned the procedures that came in after Speaker Bercow's time in the chair. What procedures do you think will come in next to make sure that this sort of thing on an opposition day can't happen again?
Well, I think the thing is that actually this particular situation is not one that's going to happen every day. I think the difficulty is about addressing several different motions on one opposition day, and that's a relatively fleeting issue, but the Procedure Committee will look at it. The Speaker's already asked them to. I think it's about the applicability of it to certain situations, and I think the difference between what happened yesterday and what happened with Speaker Bercow is that the decisions that Bercow was making had an absolute impact on the business that was before the House, the decisions that could be taken, and the real impact that those would have. I think what was extraordinary about yesterday was the way that MP after MP debated passionately about a ceasefire as if this had any effect on what actually happens in Gaza, which of course it doesn't. This is just the House of Commons expressing a view or not expressing a view. So I think, again, we need to take a step back and think, what is it we're actually arguing about here? Are we arguing about the SNP not getting to vote on their set of words? Are we arguing about the Labour Party being got out of a potentially embarrassing political situation? Or are we talking about much more broadly a political culture and an issue about Gaza, which has led to people's lives being threatened and us, it would seem, in at least contemplating the idea that we shouldn't say things or have things said in Parliament because of that going on? I think that's very worrying, and that's really what we all need to address and take a little time to do.
Yeah, you're exactly right. All right, Elliot Wilson, we could talk about this in far more detail for the rest of the afternoon, I'm sure, but unfortunately we have to leave it there. I really do appreciate your expertise, Elliot Wilson, a former clerk in the Commons from 2005 to 2016. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Now, as Elliot was saying, as the MPs grappled over what was happening in Parliament, little has changed on the ground in Gaza. There's still violence in the Middle East. In the early hours of the morning, the Israelis say they shot down a missile suspected to have been fired by the Houthi rebels from Yemen. Here's our Middle East correspondent, Alistair Bunkle.
Firstly, a few hours ago, air raid sirens right in the very south in the city of Eilat on the Red Sea. The Israelis shot down a ballistic missile that was heading towards Israel, fired, we think, from Yemen by the Houthis. It didn't come into Israeli airspace. The IDF say that it didn't put any civilians at risk, but it again goes to show that the Houthis are not relenting in their campaign to target Israel and shipping in the Red Sea as long as the war in Gaza continues. And then as well this morning in the West Bank Israeli settlement, or just outside it, of Ma'ale Adumim, a terror attack. A number of gunmen shot people as they were in their cars in stationary traffic near a checkpoint. One person was killed, and I think as many as 8 people were wounded. They're being treated now in hospitals in the Jerusalem region. The gunmen have been killed, 3 of them, 2 of them brothers, and a third was tracked down by the Israeli military. And then the other thing to add, which sort of links back to the events in the House of Commons last night, is progress on a possible new hostage deal. Benny Gantz, one of the senior members of the War Cabinet, hinting that perhaps Hamas have softened their position. Now, we think that's because Hamas were demanding a permanent ceasefire, something that the Israelis did not want to accept, but Hamas might now be ready to accept a temporary ceasefire in order to see the release of hostages, and one assumes also the release of Palestinian prisoners from Israeli jails. And I think what I would say is that the one thing we should look out for is the potential for another meeting in Paris tomorrow, or perhaps over the weekend, between the Egyptians, the Qataris, the director of the CIA, and potentially the head of the Mossad. And if Israel do send him, David Barnea, then I think that is a good indication that Netanyahu feels that there's been sufficient progression for his attendance to be worthwhile.
That's Alistair Bunker reporting from Jerusalem. Now, reports of Islamophobia in the UK have hit a record high in the months since the 7th of October attack by Hamas on Israel. Tell Mama, a charity which monitors anti-Muslim hate crime, recorded over 2,000 cases in the past 4 months. That's more than 3 times the previous year's figures. And it seems that women were more often than not the target of abuse. Well, let's bring in our correspondent, Milena Veselinovic, with more on this. So, Milena, it seems as if these numbers have gone up massively.
Yeah, Tell Mama says that this is the largest increase they've seen over a 4-month period since their organisation was established back in 2011. And they say that the brunt of it is focused on London, which makes sense. It's the biggest metropolitan centre. It's the most diverse of the cities. But what's quite concerning is that their report says that they've seen incidents of anti-Muslim hate in other regions, pretty much every single region of England and Wales. Now, about half of it is online abuse, which is distressing enough, but the other half is real-world incidents, assaults, abuse, verbal abuse, threats, discrimination, hate speech, things like these, which have a real impact of people out in the world, happening in London as well as in the region. So it does paint quite a toxic picture of what's happening with British Muslims right now.
Yeah, it's hugely concerning. And as we saw in the stats there as well, women are bearing the brunt of this.
It seems that way. Tell Mama says that about 65% of these incidents have been experienced by women. They also highlight some of the women's experiences, one of them saying she suffered an assault on board a bus in East London. She was wearing Islamic clothing at the time. Another one saying how her car had been vandalised. There was a swastika daubed all over it. Another one saying she was called a terrorist in the street outside of her home. But we also heard cases of a family, a Muslim family, having Hamas spray painted on their doors. So very distressing incidents. It does seem clear now that while this conflict may be thousands of miles away physically, it is clearly having consequences here on the streets of Britain as well.
And just final thought then, I guess, Milena, as well, you know, this news today about the huge rise in Islamophobic hate crime comes a week after we saw a huge rise in anti-Semitism.
That's right. We've heard from Jewish charities as well, from various of them, that anti-Semitism has also risen exponentially in the wake of the Hamas attacks several months ago. We've heard last week from a charity there was an increase of more than 500% of anti-Semitism. So clearly both communities bearing the brunt of this, and there is no doubt that this conflict in the Middle East has had impact on the streets of Britain as well.
Exactly right. It tells us something terrible about our society right now. Right, Milena, for now, thank you very much for that. All right, you're watching Sky News Today and still to come. Employers are ordered to take the menopause seriously or risk legal action. How Estonia is training ordinary people to defend their country against the threat of Russia. And warnings that a government scheme intended to make childcare more affordable could actually result in nurseries closing down.
And I'm Sky's US correspondent based here in Los Angeles.
It's turning everybody into, you know, a crazy, violent drug addict.
How are you feeling? I am angry. Are you a hypocrite, sir? Will your candidates win?
I hope so.
I gotta be realistic. My sister's dead.
More than 4 weeks on, there's no murder weapon and no suspect. Mum, how are you feeling today?
Jeffrey said, you answer to Ghislaine, you just don't cross her.
You're so excited.
Severe nightmares of these people coming in and just taking me in the middle of the night.
I've watched as whole towns were torn apart by natural disaster.
I'm alive and I'm thankful for that.
We take you to the heart of the stories which shape our world.
A lot of cases that I know are reported from Ukrainian missiles themselves.
Ambassador, with respect, I think that's preposterous.
Welcome back. Now, employers could be sued if they fail to make reasonable adjustments for women going through the menopause. Our correspondent Shimon Freeman-Powell has more.
Well, the Equalities Watchdog has set out this guidance, giving employers a better understanding of the rights that women experiencing the menopause can expect to receive. It comes after 1 in 10 women who have experienced the menopause said that they've had to leave their workplace due to symptoms such as hot flushes or lack of sleep or brain fog, symptoms which, if continued and substantial, can have a huge impact on women in the workplace. Because of this, the Equality Watchdog has issued this guidance, as well as giving employers some useful tips on how they can make the workplace more supportive for women experiencing the menopause. Earlier, Sky News spoke to the Health Minister, Maria Caulfield, who gave us more detail on this.
We're losing so many women who are the most experienced women in the workforce because of symptoms in the menopause. And there are some really simple things that employers can do to make the workplace better, from better ventilation through to the uniform that women have to wear. Just the material alone can make the difference about how women cope with some of those symptoms. And most employers I speak to are really, really keen to keep their experienced women in the workplace.
Maria Caulfield there, the Health Minister, speaking about some of the guidance that the Watchdog has issued for employers. But the Watchdog also gave more detail about those legal rights too, which I can share with you now. It says that menopausal symptoms could now be classed as a disability under the Equality Act's discriminatory action against someone who's absent due to symptoms of the menopause could also be considered unlawful, and derogatory comments could now be deemed as harassment under this new guidance from the Equality Watchdog. It's all about making women that are experiencing the menopause feel like they are supported more at work, because despite the fact that 1 in 10 women have said that they've had to leave the workforce due to experiencing severe menopausal symptoms, very few of those women said that they felt comfortable enough asking for employers to make these reasonable adjustments. So the Equality Watchdog is hoping that this will now go a long way, helping women feel more supported.
Shimon Freeman-Powell reporting. Let's take a look now at the weather forecast.
Warm memories wherever you go. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
It's going to be unsettled again today, and it's going to feel colder than it has recently as temperatures return to near average. Central and eastern England are going to see heavy rain this afternoon with hail, thunder and strong wind possible. Some wind may affect the southeast too. Elsewhere, there'll be sunny spells and showers. Some of those showers will be wintry on the hills, but eastern Scotland looks fine. Cloud and rain over England will give way to sunshine and showers later.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
You are watching Sky News Today, and still to come, a passionate defence. The Speaker of the House fights back.